So your seller client has approached you. You have the property information, you've done your CMA, your comparative market analysis. It's coming time to have the listing appointment or listing presentation. And so there's a few kind of initial things I would want to prep you, get you thinking about, really to spur some good conversation between you and your mentor about how they handle this. So the listing presentation is something that's changed over time. There's a lot of your own kind of style and preferences that will go into this, as well as what you think is going to be most relevant to this particular seller client and their situation. Just for some context, the old school approach traditionally was listing agent prepares a series of papers covering different topics that they're going to sit down across the table with the seller. They're going to review that, have a discussion about a handful of things like why is the agent qualified? What is the agent going to do to market the property? That'd be the marketing plan. You're going to look at the comparative market analysis, talk your seller through that. You might talk through some pricing strategies with your seller. So here's where I think the market is, and here's where we would price and why. And then you would have the listing agreement, so the actual contract where they would sign to go ahead and move forward with you as their agent to market the property. That is still something that happens, that process, and you can still do that. It can be really effective, in particular depending on who the client is. There's electronic ways to do that now. You can do this ahead of time. There's some people that will go so far as putting a lot of that into what they would call a pre-listing packet, sending this to the seller in advance of the appointment where you're gonna come in. So there's a lot of different strategies. With that, I want to talk about a couple principles, a couple ways to maybe set your frame of mind when you're having this conversation with the seller. First thing I would say, going into this appointment, this is going to sound a little bit cliche for people who've been in the business, but yes, it's a listing appointment. Your goal is to get the listing, come out of there on the same page and excited to move forward with the seller. You're partnering together to get this property sold for them. But really a lot of this appointment is about listening. So I know we call it listing, but it's really a listening appointment. So being ready with good questions for your seller and pausing to hear the answer to those questions. You want to come away from that appointment really knowing what's important to the seller, what's your seller's motivations, and just why are they selling? That's a really key thing to know. And it's a really common mistake for agents that are maybe anxious, you're nervous, you want to make a good impression, and so there's this tendency to do all the talking, show all this stuff, and really come away not knowing, does any of that even matter to your sellers? I encourage people to, first, be on time, right? I think you want to have a professional approach, conduct yourself professionally. You're in someone's home. They're, of course, going to be comfortable, but they are relying on you as a professional, right? So you want to conduct yourself accordingly. You may already have a long-standing relationship with them, but they are leaning on you in this case as the professional, right? In the spirit of it being the listing and listening appointment, a lot of that means you want to ask them about the property. You've done a CMA, but if you have not been to the property by this time, you may want to ask them to walk around. Ask what are the things they like most about the property? What are the things they have liked least about the property? What are the things they think a buyer would enjoy the most? What are some things that they think a buyer should know about that are going to have to be included in the disclosures later? So this is a good time to ask those kinds of questions and just kind of show your expertise as the counselor for them through this process that, hey, we're going to have to do disclosures later and disclose all the things that are wrong with the property, even things that were wrong that have now been repaired or fixed or remedied in some other way. So asking those questions, and maybe they can point those things out as you're going through the property. Sometimes those things that they could be significant and they could have an impact on the value, either negatively or positively, that you didn't know about while you were doing your CMA. You want to ask those questions, get a feel for that, and really ask motivation questions to your seller, like why are they selling? Why now? How did they come to call you? those kinds of things. Everything to do with price aside, what's the best outcome for them? Like what would make them the most happy, being able to move on to the next phase or step or chapter in their life. So just trying to ask those questions because you're playing a pivotal role in their life beyond just the real estate transaction. This is their home, their life, where their life happens. And so why that's moving and how you can facilitate that is really important. So ask those deeper questions, even if it's you've spent hours trying to think about the price and the strategy, the kind of emotion behind why this transaction is happening is really critical that you come away with this appointment knowing what that is for your seller. Part of this appointment is asking good questions and listening to your seller, right? So there's a few specific questions I would recommend asking most of the time. And so partly because these will come up in the transaction, negotiation, and disclosures at some point. Number one, are there any leased or liened items on the property? So the big one that's common is solar. So if there's a solar lease or a lien associated with solar on the property, you want to know that ahead of time. Could be beneficial, could be negative in terms of the value of the property. You could have other things like alarm systems, water softeners in some cases, anything else that might be leased or liened. You want to at least have asked that question. Let the seller tell you if there's anything like that. Another item would be any repairs that have been recommended but not completed. So this is a specific question on disclosures that comes up later. So this will come up no matter what. If they've had a roofer out because they were concerned about something and that roofer recommended, yeah, actually I think we need to replace this part of the roof, but they either didn't have the money or didn't agree and didn't want to do it, they still have to disclose it. So you would want to know about that so you can be proactive in dealing with it. So any, again, repairs that were recommended but not completed. Another item that comes up in disclosures is any items that have been repaired. And so the seller is going to have to go through a long questionnaire later anyway and tell all of this to the buyer. So it's good for you to know up front. Did they paint recently? Have they had wood rot damage repaired? Have they had plumbing issues repaired? Has there been anything like that? Any electrical issues, mechanical issues like with the AC or water heater or whatever it might be? So any of these things that have been repaired, you're going to have to disclose it. And frankly, some of the times these are actually nice selling points. If the water heater or HVAC had been replaced recently, or had a large service, or is completely or partially upgraded, whatever the case may be. Sometimes these are good selling features that you can use and are beneficial in the marketing. Other times they're not, but you can actually construct your marketing in a way that sets the expectation right for the buyers, just again to give it the most positive outcome as possible. Another one would be any work done without permits. So you're going to ask if any work was done. There's an extra layer. Was anything done without permits that maybe should have had a permit? A lot of times sellers don't know if it should have had a permit or not, and really this is just a chance for you to open that conversation and find out if there is more there that needs to be known. But if they did a big addition or enclosed a sunroom and they want to count all of that square footage, but none of that was done with a permit, it's not that you can't still sell the house, but that does change how you would handle the marketing in that case. Those types of nuances are really good things to talk about with a mentor or someone experienced. And there's an infinite number of possible scenarios there, but that's a good question that will bring those to light often. Another one is just regarding the neighborhood. So every now and then we have we call the nosy neighbor problem, right? Where somebody in the neighborhood takes it upon themselves to know everything about everyone and tell everyone everything. And it's generally pretty annoying. However, this can happen, right? So if there's going to be some neighborhood concern that the seller knows, hey, we've got nosy neighbor over here, and every time someone's coming for a showing or there's an open house, that neighbor is going to come like clockwork and tell everyone who's coming through the home all this stuff. It's good to get in front of that, right? So you would hope that doesn't happen, but you might be surprised this happens a lot. So if there's any of that type of concern, good, bad, or otherwise, it's just really, again, good to get in front of it. Ask your seller that question. And even if it's not, say, during the marketing or open houses or whatnot, if it's the kind of thing where you can ask the seller, like, hey, after there's a new buyer here, is there some story or concern that there's a neighbor's likely to come talk to that buyer about? It's good to ask that now, right? You don't want to let the buyer be blindsided like that. It's potential non-disclosure issue for the seller. You're much better off strategizing a way to deal with any concerns like that. If they are there, dealing with them in advance proactively rather than reacting because you're surprised by it because we didn't ask the right questions to the seller. With that, those are some things to think about and some questions to ask that generally show you're being thoughtful and also just to kind of help spark more back and forth conversation with your seller, get your strategy right, your pricing right, and getting on the market with the best chance of a good outcome.